South Korean dramas, or also called K-dramas, have been taken over the global entertainment sphere. They are often recognized for their cliché plots or their beautiful visuals. However, sometimes something feels off about it, especially the cliché behaviors that are shown and sometimes are seen as quite problematic.
You definitely have seen some gay dramas gotten more aggressive when it comes to the male lead. For example, grabbing hands and pushing against the wall, or belittling.
Сука, блядь, ебаная.
While it might make your heart flatten or spice up the K-drama applied to real life, it might not be put in the same light. As recently, there has been an upcoming issue of domestic abuse within the South Korea.
By looking at the statistics of IPV, reviews of K-drama viewers, analyzing K-dramas, and scholarly texts, we will explain how the depiction of these romanticized aggressive actions impacts South Korean society and contributes to the persistent reality of domestic abuse in the country.
Before we get into it, you need to understand this term. IPDV, meaning intimate partner domestic violence, is described by Baek Sonuk and Eugenia as a domestic violence that occurs between intimate partners within the household. It is seen as a problem as this is not recognized by the government as something they're obligated to solve, but rather as a private matter which lay outside the institutional protection. To say in short, the law does not protect those who are close.
If you're into K-dramas, you could not have possibly missed this one. Boys Over Flowers is one of the perhaps most well-known K-dramas out there, as a lot of newer K-dramas have been influenced by its plot of a cold male lead. However, if you look at this clip, opposite of the drama where they eventually will end up together, in real life this would have a very different ending, perhaps even with the police. Besides the romanticization of pure abuse through dismissing it as a rough past of the male lead, there's also the ongoing romanticization of the act of stalking. Charlotte et al. Explains that protective paternalism refers to the belief that men should protect, take care of, cherish, and provide for the woman on whom they depend. In the article, they go on explaining how restrictive behaviors for protection are often seen as sexist or discriminative when it comes to male colleagues, but when it comes to romantic partners, it would often be perceived as positive. This is another wrong implication that K-dramas make. By romanticization, stalking in sake of protecting the female lead. By repeatedly showing off such actions, it would come only natural to apply this to real-life behaviors. However, would this not as much be appreciated?
The aggression within families is stereotypically believed by many scholars to be originating from the patriarchal factors of Confucianism. However, although Confucian values support filial piety and thereby reinstate hierarchy rules within families, it does not directly imply that this is caused by IPV. However, it does explain that such actions are seen as an internal family issue, put in other words, to be dealt with by the family themselves rather than a crime that society is allowed to punish or pursue. This non-crime family issue causes that although the abusive behaviors in K-dramas are often resented by women, not much can be done as the law does not fully recognize threats within close relationship, most certainly not within a household. This is all happening even though the Special Act on Domestic Violence was enacted in 1997. This makes the encouragement of abusive action in entertainment even more dangerous, as women fail to be protected by the law. Alongside this, the defamation acts that have been happening in Korea make it even harder to report the abuse.
In Kim and Ferrares' article about IPV victims and police, they discovered that South Korea's IPV prevalence rate was way higher than those of other countries. While Korea rated 35%, other countries rated way below 5%. However, it did state that 60% out of the 5,000 participants would go to the police if this were to occur. Then again, in the documentary Undercover Korea, it lays out an example of once one goes to the police, how hard it is to then actually file a report on an abusive action of a partner, especially as being romantically involved is often interpreted as just having a lover's quarrel, like portrayed in K-dramas. Not to mention the social pressure of judgment and shame these victims have to deal with, show a harsh reality opposite to the beauty filter of K-drama.
Another thing to notice is the shift of blame. Kim Jae-up et al. Argues that exposure to violence, whether in the family, through adverse childhood experience, or interpersonal behavior, cultivates neutralizing beliefs. This leads to attitudes that excuse the use of violence against intimate partners because of traumatic past experiences, which is often reflected by the male lead. This unhealthy belief justifies the abuser's action and may shift the blame to the victims instead. Therefore, we can see that this ongoing cycle of violence is caused by a mix of an inadequate government system and encouraging entertainment sphere.
As you can see, South Koreans in their 20s face the highest risk of IPV compared to all other age groups. Nationally, rates of occurrence for IPV among individuals in their 20s were around 69.7%. This is also the age group that consumes dramas the most. One of the most reoccurring aggressive acts this age group has to deal with and reflects in K-dramas is stalking. Post-breakup stalking is very common and often preceded by IPV or during the relationship. As argued by Kim and Cho, offenders who commit multiple types of violence, physical, emotionally, and sexual, are at the highest risk of committing post-breakup stalking, which would be around 47.7%. Even though South Korea might seem quite numb as a society to IPTV, there have been instances of viewers disagreeing and even boycotting series of producers for actions that have been shown. This could be a reason why there have been more instances of direct abuse in the past, whereas more recently it became a rather sensitive topic. For example, this review left by a watcher of Coffee Prince stated how the rather toxic male lead presented abusive behavior, which all would be accepted because of his neglected past, thereby recognizing and raising awareness of how this could not be put in a real-life, everyday context.
Overall, older K-dramas showed more abuse through sexism and gender roles. When looking at the modern dramas, this focused on the strength of female lead characters. Still, to completely break the cycle of media-motivated IPV, we must recognize that romanticized aggression is not harmless fantasy. It is a cultural reinforcement of violence. Prevention requires multi-phase approaches, challenging the patriarchal narratives in media, dealing accurately with the portrayed behaviors, and challenging gender attitudes, thereby promoting positive help-seeking behaviors and less interest towards IPV. So no more forceful acts like showing someone against the wall unless the female lead is portrayed to just as much give a payback.